Assalamu alaikum. Hello and welcome everyone to the day 2 of the P7 crash courses for June 2018 examination. I am Kashif Kamran, your tutor for these crash courses. Now, yesterday we had a focus on risk assessment, and today, on the second day of these crash courses, our focus is on evidence. Now, in the session today, we will be learning how we can be good at evidence in P7. Now, evidence is a very important question in P7 exams and has been a regular feature of P7 exams. Yes, at some times in some exam sittings, we do find an absence of a question on evidence, but that's very rare. In most of the exam settings, there is a question on evidence. So as a student preparing for June 2018 examinations, you should be very clear about the nature of the question on evidence which comes in P7 exams. And that is exactly what I will be doing in the first half an hour with you to tell you and make you understand the nature of the question which comes on evidence. Because once you know exactly what the question is asking for and what exactly you should be doing, then solving a question becomes very easier. Now, in terms of evidence, there are many past paper questions you can do after the session ends today. The exam questions on your screens are divided into two parts, type 1 and type 2. Now, I will be illustrating in my session today what is basically a type 1 question and what is basically a type 2 question. Now, these are jargons which I specifically use in my lectures because to me there are two types of questions which comes on evidence in P7, and as a student you should be prepared for both the types. So you have the practice bank in front of your screen for type 1 as well as for the type 2, and you can see yourself that the type 2 has come at very few instances. It's the type 1 question which has been a regular feature of P7 exams. But having said that, the type 2 question is very, very important for your June 2018 examination. I have a belief that the type 2 question can come in June 2018 examination and have included that as a high probable area for June 2018 examinations. Now, first of all, I need to make you understandable about the two types of questions which comes on evidence. The first type of question which comes on evidence is a question which asks the candidates to comment on the matters and explain the evidence you should expect to find during your review of the working papers. And in the type 2 question, the examiner asks the candidates to comment on the sufficiency and appropriateness of the evidence obtained. Now, these are two types of questions which have come in past papers, and I will be preparing you for both the types today in my session. The first question, which I refer as the type 1 question, asks the candidates to comment on the matters, and then there is a comma, and the examiner says explain the evidence you should expect to find. The you here is the manager. You should expect to find. You should expect to find during your review. Now we know the manager performs the review of the working paper towards the end of the audit. Now the examiner is exactly putting you into that role. That being a manager, you you need to find the evidence you should expect to find during your review of the working paper file. So you have to imagine yourself as being a manager attempting this question, and you have to imagine that there is a file in front of you which you are reviewing. And in the file, what evidence you expect to find in the file. So that's the nature of the question number one. In the second nature of the question, the examiner asks you to comment. But this time it's not the comment on the matters, it is the comment on the sufficiency and appropriateness of the evidence obtained. Now, the evidence which has been obtained by the team, you have to comment on whether the evidence obtained is sufficient or not, or whether the evidence obtained is appropriate or not. So in the second type of the question, you have to comment on the sufficiency and appropriateness of the evidence obtained. So let's start an illustration of the temperament you require for handling a type 1 question and the temperament you require to handle a type 2 question. Okay, I'm getting back to the Word file I was using in the session yesterday for risk. Now I'm using the same Word file for the session today. Now, first of all, let me illustrate you the requirements of the two types of questions. Okay, the first type, the type 1, and the second type, the type 2. And I believe this is high probable. This is high probable for your June 2018 examination, the type 2. I've already included this in my key tips for June 2018 examination, but please, you have to prepare yourself for both the types. This is just an estimation that the type 2 can come in June 2018 examinations. Okay, first of all, if I look at the type 1, the type 1 asks you comment on the matters and explain the evidence you should expect to find during your review of the working papers or during your review of the working paper file. Now, when the examiner asks you the type 1 question, the very first thing the examiner is asking you is comment on the matters, question mark. Now, when the examiner asks you comment on the matters, when the question is on evidence, right? Comment on the matters in a question on evidence. Then, in that case, what exactly are you commenting on? Number one, you are commenting on the materiality. Second, you are commenting on the accounting treatment. And thirdly, you are commenting on the risk of material misstatement. That is, you're commenting on under or overstatement. This is exactly what we did in the class yesterday, the MTR. The only difference was that in the class yesterday, the MTR was in the topic of risk. So every risk has 2 marks. So even if you applied the MTR in a risk question yesterday, that was giving you 2 marks. But the same MTR you apply in a question on evidence, it will give you 3 marks. For commenting on the materiality, you will get 1 mark. For commenting on the accounting treatment, you will get 1 mark. And for commenting on the risk, you will get 1 mark. So technically, I tell my students that in 100 marks question, if you get an audit risk or if you get a risk of material misstatement in the first question, and suppose in question 2, question 3, you get a type 1 question on evidence, then that means you're applying the MTR many times in 100 marks paper. But the only difference in MTR in risk is that MTR in risk gives you 2 marks, right? and the MTR in a comment on matters when the question is on evidence gives you 3 marks. The approach is the same which we established yesterday, the MTR approach, right? So there is no difference between the way you write it, but the only difference is the marks. Okay, so when you are commenting on the matters, your first comment is the comment on the materiality, then the second comment is on the accounting treatment, and the third comment is on the risk of material misstatement. Each comment will give you 1 mark. So that means in a question on evidence, the matter is basically an accounting issue. The matter is basically an accounting issue, right? So as simple as that, in a question on evidence, the matter is equal to an accounting issue. And on that accounting issue, you need to apply the MTR. So that is easy 3 marks. Then you come down and the examiner says, explain the evidence. Danish, in a question on comment on the matters, uh, every time there will be materiality. This is not a risk question we were doing yesterday, where materiality was where possible. But in a question on evidence, the materiality will be there in every situation. In every situation, there will be materiality, right? Because the question says comment on the matters. So examiner will deliberately give you the materiality. Is that clear, Danish? Okay, secondly, when the examiner asks you to explain the evidence you should expect to find during your review of the working papers. Now, be very careful. It says the evidence in the working papers or the evidence in the working paper file, which you should expect to find. So I tell my students that you have to imagine in the exam hall that there is a file in front of you and you are looking at a file. What you should expect to find in a file, in the working paper file. You are a manager, right? And you are looking at a file in front of you. And while you are conducting a review of the file, what will you expect to find in the file? The form of the evidence. Obviously, the evidence you will expect to find in the files are the working papers. So working paper means something in the form of tangible. Working paper means something in black and white. Working paper means something in documentary form. Working paper means something which is tangible. So what's the emphasis? The emphasis is on the working in the working paper file, in the working paper file. So evidence in the working paper file would be what? I normally make a mnemonic for evidence in the working paper file, which says CTRM. Now I'll illustrate what CTRM is as a mnemonic, which I use oftenly for attempting a question on evidence in the working paper file. Now, first of all, you should understand that whenever you are writing the evidence number one has to come from the case, has to come from the case study. You cannot search for evidence out of the case study. You have to search for the evidence within the case given to you by the examiner. So you need to be specific, right? That was something even discussed yesterday. You cannot be journal in P7. You have to be specific in P7. So from where will you find the evidence? From within the case, from within the case given by the examiner. So it has to be within the case, right? Secondly, it has to be evidence has to be in tangible form. Why tangible form? Because it is basically working, it is basically working papers. So working paper means tangible, right? So what we have in file? In file we have papers. So what's the form of the evidence? The form of the evidence is something in paper form. So has to be in tangible form because we're talking about working papers, right? Papers. So the emphasis is on papers. Third, it has to there has to be a reason. There has to be a reason for each evidence in working paper in the working paper file. You need to ask yourself in exam paper why. What is the reason? What is the reason of having this evidence in the working paper file? So you should write the reason of the evidence. You should write the why. Why is the evidence in the working paper file? For what purpose, right? Reason means the purpose. Reason means the objective. And how many evidence you should write. It depends upon marks. So if the examiner has given you 7 marks, you will be writing 7 evidences because how many evidence will you write depend upon the marks. It's 1 mark per evidence. It's 1 mark per evidence with reason given. Right, so I have just broken down the CTRM. The C stands from, it has to come from the case study. One, the T stands for, it has to be in tangible form. The R stand for, it should have a reason. And the M stand for the marks. The marks means how many you should be writing. So from where will you search the evidence? You will search the evidence from the case 1. What should be the form of evidence? Papers. Paper means tangible. For every evidence, there has to be a reason why. And how many evidences will you write? Depend upon the marks. 1 mark per evidence with reason. So that is the mnemonic I have extracted through my experience of teaching P7, that it is CTRM. Okay, I hope all of you can listen to me now. Okay, I think the sound quality is back on track, and all of you can now listen to me as well as you can see the screen sharing as well now. Okay, just give me a minute to resolve this matter. Okay, is the sound quality better now? Now, can all of you hear me? Okay, can you just give me a minute and so? I just need to resolve this issue. Need to convert to the other. Yes, I just need to convert to the other internet connection. Just give me 2 minutes, so I'll resume back with a proper voice quality. Apologies for this connectivity issue. Okay, welcome back. I hope the sound quality is better this time. Okay, that's great enough, right? Apologies for that, some internet connectivity issues, and if it happens again during the session, so please do inform me of the voice quality issues, right? Okay, let's get back to the discussion we were having in terms of the CTRM. Now, I have made this mnemonic for evidence in the working paper file, which I normally use in my regular classes as well, that when you are writing the evidence in the working paper file, you have to think about the case study because the evidence will come from within the case. It has to be in a tangible form because we are talking about the working papers. So the working papers have to be in a tangible form. You need to give a reason for each evidence, that why the evidence is there in the working papers. And finally, you need to write as many evidences as the marks are, because there is 1 mark per evidence. So you have to see how many marks you have to write them. Now, I need to illustrate to you that when we look at the C is for the case, right, Maham? A C is the case, that you have to find the evidence from within the case study. Okay, now let me illustrate you what exactly is evidence. Now, when we say that the evidence is in the working paper file, the evidence is in the working paper file, and I just mentioned that the evidence has to be in the tangible form. So think realistically. You have to agree that the evidence which is in my working paper file, if I have a file in front of me, which I refer to as my working paper file, the evidence in the working paper file is the papers, right, which must have come from the management. For example, the evidence could be a lease agreement, which I must have obtained during the audit. The evidence could be the loan agreement, which I must have obtained during the audit. The evidence could be the board minutes, which I must have taken during the course of the audit. The evidence could be the rent agreement. The evidence could be the cash book. The evidence could be the bank statement. See, it has to be in all paper form. Now, when I go for the audit, I do take evidence in the form of tangible, like the agreements, like the policies, like the cash book, like the bank statement, like the fixed asset register. Now, you have to be realistic that when you're writing the evidence in the working paper file, the evidence, there is much of the evidence which comes from the management. Evidence is provided by management to the auditor. That's the first rule, right? Now, when the evidence is provided by the management to the auditor, so when I write my evidence, I have to write evidence in the form of, when the evidence comes from the management, right, I have to be very particular about, suppose the management gives me a lease agreement during the course of the audit. Now, I cannot take the original lease agreement in my working paper file. Any information or any evidence which is given to me by the management, I should make a copy of it before I put it in my working paper file. So if you see the examiner answer, so examiner says a copy of a lease agreement, a copy of a bank statement, because any information which you take from the management, you cannot just take it back to your office. You have to make it a copy, you have to make a photocopy of it. So when you write an evidence which is provided by the management, then you have to write the word copy before that. So you will say copy of the lease agreement, because that is in the working paper file, right? Same goes with copy of the bank statement. Same goes with copy of the loan agreement, right? Same goes with copy of the fixed asset register, copy of the payroll register, copy of the cash book. See, all these documents, the lease agreement, the bank statement, the loan agreement, the fixed asset register, the payroll register, the cash book, is coming from where? Is coming from the management. So if I take all these evidences from management, I have to write the word copy, because I cannot take them in original form in my working papers. So when I'm putting all of them in my working papers, I have to use the word copy. But at times, if you look at these documents here, like register, book, and you want to make an impression in front of the examiner, rather than I say copy of a register or copy of a book. Now, technically, it sounds like something in volume. When I say book, when I say register, all of a sudden I can imagine that a register and a book is something very voluminous. So instead of using the word copy with a register, I can even use this word in exam paper. I can say extracts, extracts of the fixed asset register. Even if you use the word copy, that's not wrong. But if you want to make an impression, you can say extracts of the fixed asset register. Copy of the payroll register, again, you can say extracts of the payroll register. Copy of the cash book, again, you can say extracts of the cash book. So if you want to make an impression, and in an exam you're writing something in a form of a register, or in an exam you're writing something in a form of a book, then it's better to use the word extract. But even if you write the word copy, that's not an issue. So that's the rule number one, right? If the evidence is coming from the management, then any evidence which comes from the management, I have to write the word copy, right? When I'm writing it in my working paper file. Secondly, number two, evidence obtained directly by the auditor. Evidence obtained directly by the auditor. If the evidence is directly obtained by the auditor, then let's see how will it get to your working paper file. Now there are so many evidences which the auditor directly take himself. For example, auditor observe, auditor reperform, auditor discuss, auditor analyze, right? See, there are so many things which the auditor do himself. The auditor observes something, the auditor recalculates something, the auditor discuss something, the auditor analyze something. Now, if the auditor is observing something, or if the auditor is recalculating something, or if the auditor is discussing something, or if the auditor is analyzing something, now what will be in the working paper file? If the auditor observes something, he must have some findings of observations, right? If he's recalculating something, he must have some findings of recalculations. If he's discussing something, whatever the auditor do himself. So if I am a manager and I am checking your file, and during the course of the audit you recalculated something, so how will I get to know, being a manager, that you recalculated something? Or if you had discussed something with the management, how will I get to know that you discussed something with management? Or even if you have analyzed something, how will I get to know that you have analyzed something? There has to be something in the working paper, right, through which I will get to know that you have analyzed something, you have discussed something, you have recalculated something, or you have observed something. So what the examiner writes before all the four things, the examiner says that when you observe something, what is in the working paper file? In the working paper file, you will have results of observation. You will have results of observation. Result means your findings on a piece of paper. When you recalculated something, the same goes with it. Results of recalculation. Results of recalculation means your calculation on a piece of paper. Discussion, the same happens with discussion. The results of discussion. And if you analyze something, you will have results of analysis. So that means as simple as that. If we take something from the management, we add the word copy. If I do something myself, then I'll simply put one word in the exam paper, which is results. That is a word used by examiner, right? You cannot write you cannot write findings, you cannot write minutes, but the proper word to be used is results. So if you do something in your working paper, you will have results of it, right? You will have results of your observation, you will have results of your recalculation, you will have results of your discussions, you will have results of the analysis. So if I am your manager, I will get to know that you observed something, or I will get to know that you have discussed something, right? So evidence in is provided by the management and evidence obtained directly by the auditor. These are the two rules, right? The third rule, there are many evidences in working paper file before which you will not add any word. You will not add any word. There are many evidences in the working paper file before which you will not add any word. Any word means results and copy or extracts. If the evidence comes from the management, you add the word copyright. If the evidence is obtained by the auditor, you add the word results. But there are many evidences before which you will not add any word. For example, if you're writing breakups of something, breakups of sales, or you say breakup of operating expenses to verify something, or you say breakup of liabilities, etc. The breakup of anything, right? Now, before the breakup, you will not write copy of the breakup. You will not write extracts of the breakup. See what I've written in the bracket for number 3, before which you will not add any word. So breakup will start directly. Breakup of sales to confirm something. Breakup of operating expense to confirm something. You will not add any word before it. Same happens with draft financial statements. Draft financial statement. If you're confirming something from the draft financial statements, if you want to confirm something from the balance sheet, or if you want to confirm something from the income statement, so you will say draft financial statement to confirm something. So what is the evidence in the working paper file? The evidence in the working paper file is the draft financial statement, not copy of the draft financial statement, not extracts of the draft financial statement, right? So what is the evidence in the working paper file? The breakup, not the copy of the breakup. The draft financial statement, not the copy of the draft financial statement, even though they're coming from the management, but you will not add anything before them. The last thing, the representation, the written representation from the management, the written representation. A lot of time the auditor take a written representation. So you will not say copy of the written representation, extracts of written representation. Rather, you will say written representation to confirm something. So these are three very important things before which you will not add any word. You will not add any word. Please see the emphasize. You will not add any word, right? So that means as simple as that. As simple as that. That means the evidence in working paper file is equal to either a copy of something, right? The evidence in the working paper file will either be an extract of something, right? The evidence in the working paper file would either be a results of something, or the evidence in the working paper file would be something like breakups, will not add any word. Draft financial statements will not add any word, or it would be the written representation. So that is the complete picture of evidence now. Muhammad Anas, we normally take breakups to uh, determine, for example, if I have to determine how much is the cash sale and how much is the credit sales. So where will I get to know this? I will get to know this from the breakups, right? If I want to know how much, what is coming in the current liability. So I will take the breakup of the current liabilities to know what is exactly coming under the current liabilities. So at times the auditor needs the breakups to go deep inside. So if you want to go deep inside, you have to take the breakups of things to go deep inside and check whether the figure is coming or not. Is everyone clear with the three thumb of rules? When to write the word copy and extracts, when to write the word results, and when to write nothing? Is everyone crystal clear on that concept? I hope you will not do any blunder on that. Okay, now let's do one final exercise, then putting a paper in front of you, and then I have to give equal time to the type 2 question as well. Okay, now understand one thing. Now, this is a very frequently asked question from students. They says that when we see the examiner answer on evidence, when we see examiner answer on evidence, this is a very frequently asked question, right? And I need to clarify that. It is the student asking, right? When we see the examiner answer on evidence, we do see examiner writing procedures, examiner writing procedures in a in an answer on evidence. So uh, student gets very shocked looking at that, and they say, why does the examiner writes procedures in an evidence answer? You told us in the class that we need to write evidence, but I see examiner writing copy, extracts, results, and all of a sudden I see examiner writing review the board minutes, and you think review the board minutes, review is a procedure. You told us in the class that you need to write results of recalculation, but I see in the examiner answer, examiner writing recalculate the deferred tax asset. But you told us in the class that we have to write the results of recalculation. But the examiner was writing a procedure, recalculate the deferred tax asset. I hope you know the procedure starts with a action verb. So if I recalculate, that is the procedure. But if I say results of recalculation, that becomes an evidence. Now, if that is a frequently asked question, and if that is in your mind even when you're attending this crash course, let me make you clarified on this. There is a resource which is only available to the platinum approved learning provider tutors. And because I'm associated with a platinum approved learning provider, which is basically the Tabani School of Accountancy, I have an access to the examiner conference and the minutes of the examiner conference, which happens once in every 2 years. The last examiner conference was held in 2017 April, and in the April 2017 examiner conference, of which the minutes are made available by ACCA to all the tutors teaching at the Platinum ALPs. I have a privilege of that minutes, which I have in hard copy with me, but I'm writing something from the minutes for you to understand what exactly the examiner says. Examiner says, this was a question which was asked to the examiner in the conference. I'm exactly reading that. It says, where the requirement is for matters to consider and evidence, why do publish answer? Why do publish answer sometime includes procedures? So the person is asking a question to the examiner where the requirement is for the matters to consider and evidence in the working paper file. Why do published answer sometime includes audit procedure? See what is the examiner answer. The examiner answered, we try to make answers as broad as possible. So examiner says we try to make answers as broad as possible. This is not just for this question. This is also for questions the student normally asks that examiner answers are lengthy. Examiner answers have this, that. So should I do this? Should I do that? This is addressing all of those questions. Examiner is saying we try to make answers as broad as possible. And then it says it can be a fine line between. See, this is for you. Take it very carefully. Examiner says it can be a fine line between evidence and a procedure, and we don't, we means the examining team, right? We don't want to penalize students too harshly for how answer is expressed. This is exactly the examiner. This is exactly the examiner words. I'm taking them directly from the minutes I have in front of me. So when we see when we see examiner answers on evidence, we do see examiner writing procedures in an answer on evidence. The answer to that is the examiner says we try to make answers as broad as possible. So examiner, when he's writing an answer on evidence, too writes procedure because he's trying to make answer as broad as possible. But it is examiner is giving you a ray of hope. Even if you are confused between procedures and evidence, even if you are confused between procedures and evidence, examiner is giving you a ray of hope here. He says this, which can reduce your stress level. It says it can be a fine line between evidence and a procedure, and we don't want to penalize students too harshly for how the answer is expressed. So that means in a question on evidence, even if a student writes procedures, examiner won't penalize you for that, right? I hope that is exactly what we're getting out of the examiner statement, right? But I have to make one clarification. This is a practice which should not be encouraged. Yes, in an exam hall, you can do a mistake. Examiner would not penalize you for that. But rules are rules. If you are clear on rules, then write evidence. But mistakenly, you wrote some evidences and some procedures, examiner would not penalize you for that. So examiner says there is a thin line, there is a fine line between evidence and procedures, and we don't want to penalize students for how the answer is expressed. So if you wrote 2 evidences and 4 procedures, Examiner will not penalize you for that. But this is not something which should be encouraged, because the rule of an evidence is different and the rule of a procedure is different. If you are clear on that, then stick to that. But if you still do a blunder, you will not be penalized. So is that reducing your stress level? If any one of you have confusions between procedures and evidence, is that statement of the examiner saving your June 2018 exam setting? Because a lot of time I've seen students having so much confusions on procedures and evidences. Is that line of the examiner saving you? Yes or no? So will that reduce your stress in exam hall? That even if you write procedure in evidence, or the vice versa, even if you write evidence in procedure or procedure in evidence, will you be rescued in exam paper? Will you still be getting marks? You will be, right? So is that a confidence booster? Okay, perfect. So is was that a frequently asked question even you have in mind as well? Have I addressed your frequently asked question? Okay, perfect. So that is it for the type 1 question, right? So the type 1 question focus on matters and the type 1 question focus on evidence. So are you clear with the nature of the type 1 question? Comment on the matters. Is everyone clear what you should do with comment on the matters? And is everyone clear what you should do with evidence in the working paper file? You know the marking scheme, and I've given you a mnemonic MTR. Comment on the matters is MTR, and the evidence is the CTRM. Okay, so the type 1 is clear, right? Okay, let's do a question on type 1 then. Because I want to show you that even mistakenly, if you write a procedure, whereas you have to write an evidence, examiner would not penalize you harshly for that. So I deliberately do that to demonstrate that as well, right? Okay, let's do the first exam paper. The first exam paper we're doing for the evidence today is the June 14 question number 3. Question 3 of the June 14 exams. Now, if you look at the question 3 of the June 14 exams, it has the same requirement which we just understood. Question number 3, right? Question 3A of the June 14 exams. Can you see the requirement at the bottom? It says comment on the matters. Comment on the matters. Now you know what exactly matters are. And explain the evidence. And explain the evidence you should expect to find during your review of the working paper. See, if you know the question, you can solve the case. But if in an exam paper you're reading a requirement and you don't understand what matters are, half the time you will be confused in the exam hall. So if you know the requirement, you can attack a case. But if you don't know the requirement, the case is useless. The case will only become productive if you know exactly what is to be done, right? Now, how many marks we have? We have 8 marks. We have 8 marks for the situation number 1, and we have 7 marks for the situation number 2. And for each situation, we have to find the matters, MTR, and for each situation, we have to find the evidence in the working paper file, CTRM. So I'm giving you 5 minutes. Read the 3A1, which is in front of your screen now, and 3A2. See what you get out in 5 minutes. And after 5 minutes, I'll illustrate the answer. Again, the answers have been shared with you, but again, I'll be making an illustrative answer just to demonstrate how you will apply the mnemonics. Okay, your 5 minutes starts now. Start reading and make your points. Make your points on MTR, make your points on CTRM. See how many evidences can you find from the case. Make sketches in 5 minutes. Okay, I've just posted a snapshot of the minutes from the examiner conference, which was held in April 2017. So exactly, you can see that in black and white, and uh, you can rely on that comment effectively, because there is another comment of the examiner which I have to share. For that reason, I have put the snapshot of that relevant piece of paper on the WhatsApp group, which is for the crash courses. I hope all of you have received that picture. Okay, have all of you read the question? 3A1, the Cooper Company factories, and the 3A2, the finance director, Hannah. Can you just raise your hands if you have read it? Just raise your hands if you have read the question. Okay, I can just see 7 to 8 raise of hands. Okay, that's good. So I'm believing that most of you have read it now. So let's start the analysis. Now we have to do two things, right? Comment on the matters and explain the evidence. Now we have marks 8 and 7. So let's start with the illustration of the June 14 exams. In the June 14 exams, the question number 3, part A, which we are taking as the first question for the exercise on the type A question. Now, if I first look at the Cooper Company factories, how many marks we have for Cooper Company factories? 8 marks, right? And then the car sold to finance director. The car sold to finance director has 7 marks. Now under the 8 marks, I have to comment on the matters, and under the 8 marks, I have to write evidence in working papers. So these are the two subheadings, right? The main heading is the Cooper Company factories. That's exactly you do in the exam paper, right? The second heading is cars sold to finance director. Under that are the two subheadings, matters and evidences. So matters is my first subheading and evidence is my second subheading. Now, when you start writing on matters, you know every matter is worth 1 mark, right? Materiality 1 mark, accounting treatment 1 mark, risk 1 mark. And every evidence is worth 1 mark, right? So just a minute, right? I write this the same under the card sold to finance director, evidence in working paper file. So at least the format is ready. Now 1 and 2. Okay, so the format is now ready. We just need to fill in the format, right? Okay, now be realistic with one thing. I have just put a picture on the WhatsApp group. If I can show you that. This picture. If you see this picture in front of you, I am reading the second comment. It says the marking scheme says 1 mark for each relevant point. What happens? What happens if a candidate only gives methods in their answer? Suppose you don't write any evidences and you write all matters. You have to do two things, right? Matters and evidence. So it says the marking scheme says 1 mark for each relevant point. There is no cap. There is no cap how many matters you have to write and how many evidences you have to write. So the marking scheme says 1 mark for a matter, 1 mark for evidence, but it does not say 1 mark for a matter up to a maximum of, no, 1 mark for an evidence up to a maximum of. So there is no cap, but there is 1 mark for every point. What happens if a candidate only gives matters in their answer? See what is the examiner saying? We do not cap the marks that are available for matters. So it is possible, in principle, for candidates to score full marks for an answer that only contain matters. I'm reading it again. We do not cap the marks that are available for matters. So it is possible in principle for candidates to score full marks for an answer that only contain matters. But they would be very unlikely to be able to do this. So you should advise candidates not to take this approach. So examiner is saying even if you write all matters, you can still get your full marks. But he's saying that would be very less likely that you can accumulate all your marks on matters. Now I'll try to illustrate my question that out of my 8 marks, how many marks I can take maximum on matters. So that means you can maximize matters and reduce evidences. And even if you write all matters, if you have an opportunity and you write no evidence, examiner will still give you full marks for it. So I hope you're clear with that comment of the examiner. We do not cap the marks. We do not cap the marks between evidence and matters. It does not say marks are equally split. No such note is written, right? Examiner does not write a note, marks are equally split. If the examiner writes a note like such, then that means we have 4 marks for matters and 4 marks for evidence. But the examiner is not putting a note like such. So that means there are no caps. So there are no caps means you have opportunity. Please, I tell students, you have to be clever to grab opportunities. You have to be clever to grab opportunities. I hope you are taking this sentence as an opportunity for you. So can you maximize matters? Can you maximize matters? Because examiner is saying 1 mark for each relevant point. 1 mark for each relevant point. I have put this snapshot even though I should not have, because these are confidential documents. These are documents which are accessible to only the approved learning providers. But I just put the snapshot so that at least you get a sense these are published by ACCA, and the examiner is telling you directly this. We do not cap the marks. So can you make your own equation of 8 marks now? You write more matters and less evidence. And even if you do the vice versa, you write all evidences and no matters, the examiner will still give you full marks. So there are no caps, right? You write more evidence and less matters. You write more matters and less evidence. Examiner is there giving you marks. Is that an opportunity for all of you to be good on this question now? Will that reduce your stress level, and will that make you more confident of attempting a type 1 question now? Okay, so let's do the exercise now on the June 14 exams. Matters number 1. Now if I look at the June 14 paper, my first matter is Cooper Company factories are recognized within the property, plant and equipment at a carrying value of $60 million. Half the factories produces a chemical which is used in farm animal feed. Half the factories, right? Examiner is saying half the factories. That means $30 million, which is used in the farm animal feed. Recently, the government has introduced a regulation stipulating that the chemical is to be phased out over the next 3 years. So the chemical that is being made in half the factories, the government has put a regulation that you need to stop making this chemical over the next 3 years. Now the government regulation is an indicator for an impairment review. So half the factories should be tested for impairments. I will find the materiality of half the factories. How much is the total assets? 240 million. So I should divide the carrying value of the $30 million with 240. So my first mark, $30 million, and I should determine and comment on the materiality, and I will get 1 mark for it. 12.5%, good enough. So that is equal to 12.5%. Okay, second, the accounting treatment. The government regulation is an indicator for impairment, is an indicator for impairment review. The factories should be reviewed for impairment. Risk: if no impairment review is performed, the factories could be overstated and the profit could be overstated. Please see the proper way of writing the MTR from my answers. I'm just making sketch to show you how you're writing the MTR. You first wrote the M, then you wrote the T, Then you wrote the R. You got 3 marks. Right? That's not the end. It says you have carried out a research into a new chemical and you have spent $1 million on the research. So we have another accounting treatment. Company have spent $1 million on a research. So I have to see $1 million. That is another value, $1 million. And I need to determine and comment on the materiality. Now we know this $1 million needs to be expensed out because it is a research cost, right? Now I have to find the materiality of a $1 million with the profit, which is $15 million. Please remember, examiner criticized student that they find illogical materialities. They find illogical materialities. When something relates with balance sheet, you need to find the materiality on the total assets. When something relates with the income statement, you have to find the materiality on the profit before tax or on the revenue. But you cannot say $1 million is a research cost. Now, technically, a research cost is to be expensed out. So you cannot find the materiality on the total assets because it's an income statement item. So you have to find the materiality on the profits. So examiner says the students are so illogical in determining the materiality that they simply divide the number with everything, whether it is revenue, whether it is profit, whether it is total assets. You cannot do so. You have to be logical. Is it a balance sheet item? Is it an income statement item? So how will you determine the materiality of $1 million on the basis of the profit before tax, which is how much? Okay, which is 6.67% of the total of the profit before tax, right? 6.67% of the profit before tax, not of the total assets, right? 6.67% of the profit before tax. And the first one was of the total assets. You got your 1 mark, right? Second, simply you will tell examiner research cost should be expensed out. And then you tell examiner the risk, if not expensed out, rather capitalize. If not expensed out, rather capitalized, it will overstate Yes, Farjana, you use materiality on the basis of profit or revenue when it is an income statement item. So if both are given, if profit is given, and revenue is given, both are given, then you will prefer profit. And obviously for balance sheet, there is only one item, which is total assets. So if both are given, profit and revenue, then you will prefer profit over revenue. And if only one is given, like revenue, and no profits are given, then if you want to find a materiality of an income statement item, then you will find it on the revenue. No, Rebecca. Initially, $1 million has to be expensed out, right? So we find materiality on what is right. We find materiality on what is right rather than what is wrong. So Rebecca, I hope that is clear. You find $1 million to the profit because you're thinking of the right accounting treatment when finding the materiality, not the wrong accounting treatment. Is that clear? So 1 mark for research cost should be expensed out and 1 mark for the risk. If capitalized, it will overstate what? If capitalized, it will overstate the profits. If capitalized, it will overstate the intangible assets and will understate the expenses. Now see how many marks have I scored on matters out of the 8. Now that is exactly what the examiner was telling. You cannot get all 8 on matters, but you can maximize your marks on matters. Now see how many marks have I got on matters because examiner was not putting any cap. So on matters I got how many marks in total out of the 8? 6. So how many evidences will I need to write to make my 8 marks? 2. That was exactly what the examiner was telling. You can maximize one thing. So I maximize the matters and I just need to write 2 evidences. So was there any cap? Was there any cap in this question? And was the examiner very clear on it? So evidences. Now what's the mnemonic for evidence? The evidence has to come from CTRM. CTRM. The first evidence. Case. Cooper Company factories are recognized within the property, plant and equipment at a carrying value of a $60 million. Half the factories produces a chemical which is used in the farm animal feed. Recently, the government has introduced a regulation. The government has introduced a regulation. Is this an important regulation? Should I have this regulation in my working papers? Muhammad Anas, I'm writing in points because I'm making a sketch. I have been telling that many times in my lecture today and yesterday that I have given the proper answers on the WhatsApp group. So in the class, I am making the sketch to illustrate how you write it in, how to fit things within time. Yes, so do we need the regulation as an evidence in our file? Yes. So will I say copy of the government regulation? I can. But technically, the government regulation can be downloaded from a website. So I should not even be writing the word copy because all these regulations are available on the government website. But even in the exam paper, if you write the word copy of the government regulation, it's fine. Copy of the government regulation. To confirm, to confirm that the chemical is to be phased out, that the chemical is to be phased out over the next 3 years. And you can even omit the word copy if you want to, because the government regulation can be downloaded from a website. So it's up to you. Okay, second, copy of the government regulation to confirm that the chemical is to be phased out. Now, please remember that you are not just focusing on evidence which comes from the case. This was the evidence from the case, right? Government regulation was the case. But you also have to focus on evidence coming from risk. See, you found 2 risks. Is that the duty of the auditor to mitigate the risk? So should the auditor find evidence on risk as well to ensure that the risk is mitigated? So what was the risk? If no impairment review is performed, if no impairment review is performed. So how will I confirm if? Should I discuss with management whether they have done the impairment or not? Will that mitigate my if no impairment review is performed? So how will I confirm whether it was performed or not? Will I discuss with management, have you performed the impairment review or not? Yes, Yashraf. Copy of the regulation, but why? I just told you that for every evidence you have to answer the why. So copy of the government regulation, but why? To confirm that the chemical is to be phased out over the next 3 years. Okay, so should I write my evidence on risk as well if no impairment review is performed? So how would I confirm that the impairment review has been performed or not? Will I do discussion with management? Right, so discussion with management will become what? Results of discussion. Results of discussion with management to confirm whether the factories were impaired or not. And mistakenly, you write this: discuss with management. Discuss with management whether the factories are reviewed for impairment or not? Will the examiner penalize you for the third bullet? If mistakenly, instead of results of discussion, you write discuss with management, will the examiner penalize you? So even if I write results of discussion or I write discuss with management, even if I do that mistake in exam paper, the examiner would not penalize me for that, right? So please remember, evidence can be on the risk itself. The second risk was what? If not expensed out, rather capitalized. So how will I ensure that the research costs are expensed out? How will I ensure that the research costs are expensed out? I need to see the operating expenses, right? And the operating expenses will confirm me that the research costs are expensed out. Yes, operating expenses, right? I have to see the operating expenses to confirm that the research costs have been expensed out. So what will I say? Breakup of operating expenses. Breakup of operating expenses to confirm that the research cost was expensed out. So I have to see the breakup of the operating expense, right? Within the breakup of the expenses, I will see the research cost was expensed out. And mistakenly, I write review the breakup of operating expenses to confirm that research cost was expensed out. So will the examiner penalize me for review the breakup? Technically discuss is a technically number 3 and number 5 are procedures, right? Number 3, number 5 are procedures. I have highlighted them in red. But will the examiner penalize me if I write number 3, number 5 in exam paper when the question is on evidence? So that means what now? That means when I say evidence has to come from CTRM, the C is the case, but that also means the evidence, the case includes the risk as well. If no impairment review performed was the risk within the case, if not expensed out was the risk within the case. So case does not only means the information in the case also means the risk in the case as well. So are you getting understanding of how to write evidence in the working paper file? But please ensure that you should have reasons. See, every time I was writing to confirm, every time I was writing to confirm, to confirm, to confirm, that was the reason. That was the reason. You cannot end your evidence without reason. You have to write reason of the evidence. Yes, Augustine, half the factories, right? So we took half the factories was 60 million, half was 30. But the factories is basically what? The factories is basically a fixed asset, right? So technically, fixed asset is what? Fixed asset is a balance sheet item. So I should find the materiality on the balance sheet item, right? I do not know the amount of the impairment loss. If I know the amount of the impairment loss, then I can work on the income statement. But do I know the amount of the impairment loss? So how can I work on the income statement? I only know the carrying value. So carrying value can be divided by the total assets, right? The carrying value cannot be divided by income statement. I hope that is clear, Augustine. Yes, Mohammed Afzal, to confirm is the way of writing. So for every evidence you say to confirm this, to confirm this, to confirm this, that will be repeated across your evidences. No, no, no. You have to stick to confirm. Yes, yes, yes. Exactly, exactly. Agree. Okay, so before the session, those of you who are taking my session for the first time, have not attended my webinars, have not considered listened to my webinars, those of you who have considered this type 1 question for the first time, what was your thought before the crash and now within the crash? How clear you are now on attempting a type 1 question? Okay, let's quickly do the next one, right? The car sold to finance director. Now, I did mention this car sold to finance director yesterday, that we are not concerned about the amount of the car because it was sold to the finance director. So the car sold to finance director is material by nature because it involves the director. So we are not concerned about $50,000, right? We are not taking out the materiality of $50,000. Deliberately, examiner reduced the materiality level when it is a directed transaction to confuse you in exam paper. Yes, Veronica, you can still write to ensure, to confirm, to ensure, both are fine. To confirm, to ensure, both are fine, right? No issues with that. Okay, so car sold to finance director is material by nature, so no need to find the materiality by $50,000. We get 1 mark here. Then the car sold to the finance director is a related party transaction and should be disclosed in the notes to financial statement. And if not disclosed, then the financial statements could be materially misstated. Now, see, yesterday we were discussing there are two types of risk, either under and overstatement or financial statements could be materially misstated. Interestingly, we got both of them in the session today. In the above, we got the risk overstatement, understatement. I use the language above, overstatement, understatement, right? Now I saying if the disclosure is not made, the financial statements could be materially misstated. Now nothing is being under and overstated, right? Rather, the financial statements are materially misstated. Right? So is everyone clear on the matters? Now, technically, in the car sold to finance director, I have no fourth meta. So that means you now have to write more evidences. So how many marks have we gained from car sold to finance director from matters? Car sold to finance director, how many marks we got from matters? 3. Can we get more marks? Can we get more marks? No, because that was the only 3 things, right? So now how many evidences we have to write? 4. We have to write 4 evidences. Okay, now the first evidence comes from risk. What was the risk? The risk was if not disclosed. So how will I confirm the disclosure was made? I will see the draft financial statements to confirm the disclosure draft financial statements to confirm the disclosure related to car sold to finance director, to confirm that the disclosure related to car sold to finance director was adequately given. So I converted my C, risk. So first of all, immediately you convert the risk to your evidence. Will I say copy of the draft financial statements? I'll directly say draft financial statements, right, to confirm the disclosure. So what's my first evidence? My first evidence is on risk. Okay, the car was sold to finance director at $50,000. $50,000 is the carrying value of the car, right? The car had a carrying value of 50,000. So can I confirm the carrying value of the car from the fixed asset register prior to its disposal? Prior to its disposal, can I confirm the carrying value of the car was $50,000? So fixed asset register, extracts of the fixed asset register to confirm the carrying value of the car prior to disposal. Right? And the market value is 75,000. The company has sold the car on the carrying value, right? Not on the market value, but there is an information coming in the case, which is the market value. Now, from where can we confirm the market value of $75,000? From where the company would have confirmed it? How did the company came to know that the market value of the car is $75,000? How did the company came to know that the market value of the car is $75,000? From an expert, from a valuation report. Okay, from a valuation report, they must have come to know the market value. Okay, that's fine. Exactly. Okay, let's write this way. Copy of the valuation report to confirm the market value of car sold to finance director, or else you can say copy of the correspondence with the car vendor. The company must have done a correspondence with any car vendor, right? And the car vendor must have told that the market value of the car is $75,000. So copy of the correspondence with the car vendor to confirm the market value of the car sold. See, I'm writing everything from the case. My first point was on the risk. My second point was on the carrying value. My third point was on the market value. So I'm not writing anything from the out of the case. My first point was on the disclosures, which is the risk. My second point was on the market value, carrying value. Yes, the payment is outstanding, right? So should I confirm from the director by when she intends to pay? Because Henna has not yet paid for $50,000. So should I confirm directly from Henna by when she intends to pay the amount? The management must have given a related party disclosure, right, in which they must have stated this is a receivable. But should I confirm from Henna results of discussions? Or even if I say discuss with Henna to confirm by when she intends to pay the amount. Or I can say results of discussion to confirm by when she intends to pay the amount. So have I broken my rule CTRM? Have I broken my rule CTRM? So in the car sold to finance director, we had 3 matters plus 4 evidences is equal to 7 marks. Right? And in the question above, Cooper Company factories, we got 8 marks. How? We wrote 6 matters plus 2 evidences. So you have to balance yourself, right? The way you want to. You write more matters, less evidence. You write more evidence, less matters. It's up to you. Examiner is not capping you, right? So be out of the fear. You write more matters, less evidence. You write less matter, more evidence. It's up to you. You have to take your 8 marks the way you want to take them. There is no cap. There is no cap. Examiner says 1 mark per valid point. So per valid point, you will take 1 mark, whether that valid point is a matter or that valid point is an evidence. And the second thing is, then when you are writing an evidence and you mistakenly write a procedure, examiner says examiner will not penalize you for that. So if even if you write a procedure in an evidence and the vice versa. Yes, Noshad, I just mentioned that, right? That I did that deliberately, that even if you're writing a question on evidence and you write a procedure, examiner will not penalize you for that. So I'm doing an illustration, right? So my point number 4th here, this one, I've see what I've written after, discuss with Henna or results of discussion. So in the exam, even if you write a procedure in a question on evidence, you will not be penalized, Noshad. So I deliberately did that for the students. So is everyone getting a clear sense of the type 1 question on evidence? Right. We are now taking a break for 10 to 15 minutes. And post break, we are starting with type 2 evidence. So you have to be prepared for type 2, which is very important for the June 18 exams. Let's see how good you can be on type 2 evidence. The way I made you clear on type 1, exactly the same way I'll make you clear on type 2. I'll make rules and then I'll put a case in front of you. Danish, I've been repeating that many times in my session today, that uh, the proper answers are shared on the group, so please see them for the way of answering them. Evidence can be written in bullets. Evidence can be written in bullets. So for evidence, my answer is perfect. That's exactly the way you write evidence in bullets: 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Procedures, procedures, actions, procedures, actions, evidence, they are all written in bullets in P7. But yes, when you write a matter, you have to make a paragraph. And in one paragraph, you will have the MTR, right? So the purpose of making the bullets was to save time. Is that clear, Danish? So, but evidence can be written in bullets, procedures can be written in bullets, action can be written in bullets. So you are allowed to do so. But for matter, you will put a heading matter, and under the matter, you will write a paragraph. Okay, so that's bringing us to the end of the first exercise. Now we are going on a 10 minutes break. So it's a break time now, and we'll resume back at 5:40 p.m. the Pakistan Standard Time. Okay, welcome back. We are now starting with the type 2 question on evidence, which in terms of my estimation looks very important for the June 2018 examination. So let's first understand what's the temperament of the type 2 question, and then I'll illustrate one type 2 question in front of you, exactly what you need to get out of it. Now, if I illustrate with you the type 2 question, the type 2 question asks the candidates to comment on the sufficiency and appropriateness of the audit evidence obtained. I'm using a mnemonic, sufficiency and appropriateness, which is a very important jargon, and it comes from the F8 paper known as SAAE, sufficient appropriate audit evidence. Now, when the examiner asks you to comment on the sufficiency and appropriateness of the audit evidence, what exactly that means? Now, that means the obtained evidence obtained by their team in the case study, the evidence obtained by the team in the case study, you have to comment on it. Number one, you have to comment on it whether it is sufficient appropriate audit evidence or not. So you have to comment on it whether it is sufficient appropriate audit evidence or not. Now, how would you judge whether it is sufficient and appropriate or not? Now, you have to know the fundamentals. So to me, this is more of a judgmental question. The question type 1, comment on the matters, MTR. Explain the evidence, CTRM. That is more like within a boundary. The type 2 is very easier if you know what is sufficiency and appropriateness. If any one of you knows what is sufficiency and what is appropriateness, you can perform very well on the type 2 question, because it's very simple, saying comment on the sufficiency and appropriateness. So whether it is sufficient appropriate audit evidence or not, and it is a judgmental question because you have to judge whether it is sufficient or not. Now let's make some quick rules, what is sufficiency and what is appropriateness, and then start putting a question in front of you. Now, obviously, when we speak of this word SAAE, sufficient appropriate audit evidence, number one, the sample size versus sufficiency. It's true, right? Higher the sample size, higher the sufficiency. Lower the sample size, lower the sufficiency. So the more sample I take, the higher will be the sufficiency. The less sample I take, less will be the sufficiency, because sufficiency is the quantity of the evidence. So the quantity of the evidence is the sufficiency. So sufficiency depends upon the sample size. So if you're reading a question which says one sample was taken, so you will say one sample? No, one sample is very insufficient. If it says 50% of the population was verified, 50% of the population was verified, then you will say, yes, it's sufficient sample. As per the rule, at least 50% of the population should be tested. At least 50% of the population should be tested. At least 50% of the population should be tested for it to be sufficient, right? At least 50. So in the exam, you can easily pick out the sufficiency. Now, the sufficiency is this, right? Sufficiency is the sample size. Now, the rest is all sufficient appropriate audit evidence. Appropriate Now, what exactly is appropriate audit evidence? Appropriate in terms of what? Appropriate in terms of, number one, the evidence has to be appropriate, right? Appropriate in terms of being reliable. It has to be reliable. Reliable means evidence gathered from third parties. Evidence gathered from third parties is more reliable than that gathered from management. So if I have to bargain between the management and the third party, so I'll give third party the dominance, the precedence, because the evidence from a third party is more reliable than the evidence from the management. But there are so many areas within the audit that there is no third party. Where are third parties? Receivables, I can interact with the customers. Payables, I can interact with the supplier. Provision or a contingent liability, I can interact with a legal advisor. A bank loan, I can interact with a bank. Fair values, I can interact with an expert. Just the card sold to finance director, we interacted with an expert, a valuer. So there are some areas within audit where you can rely on the expert, but not in all areas. But you have to give dominance to the third party, right, over the management. Yes, Bilal, sufficiency means the quantity. Secondly, appropriate means being reliable. Appropriate means in writing. In writing is more reliable. In writing is more appropriate than verbal. So something in writing is more appropriate than something in verbal, something oral, something verbally. So something verbally is less authentic. Something in writing is more. Then is in original form is more authentic. In original form is more appropriate. In original form is more appropriate than photocopy. The management cannot give auditor the photocopy. The management have to give auditor original. Auditor will read the original, will review the original, and then the auditor will himself make a copy. But the management cannot give you a copy directly. If the management is giving you a lease agreement, they have to give you an original lease agreement. You will read the lease agreement and you will make a copy yourself. But the management cannot say, we don't have an original agreement, so we are giving you a copy of the agreement. So copy is not trustworthy, right? The management have to give you something in original form. Right? So what makes evidence sufficient? The sample size. What makes evidence appropriate? First, being reliable, then being in writing, then being in original form. So these are all reliabilities of evidence, right? Then more importantly, evidence gathered by junior is less reliable than evidence gathered by senior or manager. So obviously, if the evidence is gathered by the junior is less reliable, right, than the evidence gathered by the senior or manager, because the junior can do more mistakes, the senior will do less mistakes. So gathered by the junior is less reliable than evidence gathered by the senior. The next, representation alone, representation from the management alone is not sufficient appropriate audit evidence. Is not sufficient appropriate audit. We cannot go to the audit and just take a representation. We have to do something, right? Representation is a last resort. You can take representation, but you have to take representation towards the end of the audit. You cannot just start the audit and ask the management, just give me representation letter. Representation from the management alone, see my emphasis, alone is not sufficient. Alone is not sufficient and appropriate evidence. Then only only discussions, only discussions with management is not appropriate, because only discussion is not appropriate, because whenever you do a discussion with management, you need to check the underlying records. If you're discussing with management the impairment, then you have to check the impairment working. If you're discussing with management the deferred tax, then you have to check the deferred tax working. If you're discussing with management the depreciation of the fixed assets, then you have to recalculate the depreciation. So discussion alone cannot be sufficient appropriate audit evidence, right? With discussion, you have to do something. Yes, Arif, representation alone is not sufficient appropriate audit evidence. I cannot just rely on representation. Suppose if I have to do audit on a deferred tax, I'll not say the management give me a representation on the accuracy of deferred tax. Rather, I will first review the working of deferred tax. I will recalculate the deferred tax. I will check the arithmetical accuracy of deferred tax. Then I can ask management, can you give me a representation letter on the deferred tax and the accuracy of deferred tax? But I cannot just rely on representation as the only source of evidence. Now, I tried making a long list, but you have to know the jargon very well, because this is not a jargon which you are becoming used to in a P7 paper. This is coming from carry forward from the F8 paper. So what is sufficient, what is appropriate, but you know the jargon: sufficient, appropriate audit evidence. Right? Okay, one last thing. Now, when a question comes on sufficient appropriate audit evidence, when a question comes on comment on the sufficient appropriate audit evidence, it never come alone. That means in the first part, the examiner can ask you comment on the sufficiency, but in the second part, the examiner can ask you something else. It never comes alone, rather comes in mixtures of requirements. It never comes alone, rather comes in mixtures of requirement. And most of the time, the second requirement, because it have come just in 3 instances, right? So in the 3 instances, it has been procedures. In the first requirement, the examiner says comment on the matters, comment on the sufficiency and appropriateness of the evidence. And in the second case, the examiner says recommend procedures. So comment on the sufficiency and appropriateness of the audit evidence is one requirement of the type 2 question. But what else the examiner can ask you is a mixtures of requirements pertaining to the syllabus. I hope the sound quality is sound quality is adequate for all the students? So Zishan, you have to check the voice at your end, right? Because currently in front of my panel, I can see the sound check coming at 100%. So it's very appropriate currently. Okay, so a question on comment on the sufficiency will never come alone, right? It will come with some mixture of requirements. And the last thing is, whenever you are commenting on the sufficient appropriate audit evidence, each comment carries 1 mark. Each comment carries 1 mark. So 1 mark per comment, right? So this is the type 2 question. Very simple. Comment on the sufficiency and appropriateness. Every comment will give you 1 mark, but you should know what is sufficient, what is appropriate, right? And it never comes alone. It comes with mixture of requirements. So that is as simple as that, the structure of the type 2 question. Let's do the question itself to illustrate. Okay, let's take the question. We did this June 14 as illustration. Now let's go down and start with December 16. December 2016, question number 2 for the type 2. Okay, now if you look at this question from the December 16 exams, the question number 2, right? The question 2 of the December 16 exams, which is basically the type 2 question, which is the most recent question on the type 2. And after that, there is a gap. Now, I expect to see this in the June 18 exams. Let's see whether it materializes or not. Now, you have to prepare this question very carefully. See what the question asks for. When you go down into the question and you look at the requirements, the first requirement says, comment in respect of the 3 matters described above. So in respect of the 3 matters described above. Now, when I look at a question like such an exam paper, I normally recommend student that you have a space, utilize the space, comment in respect of the 3 matters described above. 3 matters. So how many matters we have above? 3. See, this is what you can do in the reading and planning time. I have 3 matters, right? This is exactly what you can do in the reading and planning time. Now, for 3 matters, because it is a mixture question, right? For 3 matters, matter 1, matter 2, and matter 3. What I have to do, I have to comment on the sufficiency. I have to comment on the sufficiency and appropriateness of the evidence obtained. For each matter, I have to comment on the sufficiency and appropriateness of the audit evidence obtained. So what I have to do first, I have to comment on the sufficiency and appropriateness of audit evidence obtained for each matter, right? Secondly, what I have to do is recommend recommend further procedures to be performed. So what I have to do second, I have to recommend procedures. procedures, right? Third, explain the methods which should be included in a report in accordance with ISA 265, communicating deficiencies in internal control systems. So explain the matters which should be included in a report in accordance with ISA 265. And what is ISA 265? Communicating deficiencies in internal control systems to those charged with governance. So what should be included in a report? What should be included in a report? What should be included in the report? The deficiencies in the internal control systems. So I should also identify the deficiencies. So see how many things I have to do for every matter. For every matter I have to comment on the sufficiency. For every matter I have to write procedures. For every matter I have to identify deficiencies. Right? Now, how many marks I have for each matter? If I go up and see, for the first matter I have 9 marks. For the second matter I have 7 marks. For the second matter I have 7 marks. And for the third matter I have 9 marks. So that means I know my marks as well. I have 9 marks for the first matter. I have 7 marks for the second matter. I have 9 marks for the third matter. Now these are my marks. Now it's very simple. For every sufficiency, for every comment on sufficiency, you will take 1 mark. So for every comment on sufficiency, you will take 1 mark. For every procedure, you will take 1 mark. And for every deficiency, you will take 1 mark. Now there is no cap, right? The examiner is not saying marks are equally divided. There is no cap. So that means exactly the same thing we learned just prior to the break. There is no cap. So if there is no cap, then that means I can write something more, something less. How many marks I have to take? I have to take 9 marks. And everything I write will multiply by 1, multiply by 1, multiply by 1. So what is my target? My target is 9. I can write more procedures and less deficiencies. I can write more comments on the sufficiency and appropriateness of the evidence, and I can write less procedures. Now it's up to me what I write more and what I write less. But how many marks I have to take? 9. And how many things I have to do? 3. So comment on the sufficiency, fill in the blank. Fill in the blank, multiply by 1. Are you getting the sense of this table? This is exactly the reading and planning time that you should make a table to understand what is the mixture of question here, what is the mixture of requirements here. Now once you know I have to do 3 things and each of them carry 1 mark and there is no cap on me, I can do anything more, anything less. So I hope everyone is clear with that cap. Everything is clear, everyone is clear with you can write something more, something less, but your definite target is to come to 9 marks. So whatever you do, you have to take your 9 marks. Okay, please start reading the question. Start reading the question. Matter 1, matter 2, matter 3. I'm giving you 5 minutes to read it because I need to illustrate the answer for this question. Three things you have to do, right? Okay, let me just scroll it up a bit so that you can read if those of you who are relying on the screen here. Can you just read the asset held for sale? Asset held for sale, just read it and see if you can find deficiencies in asset held for sale, and you can find the comment on the sufficiency in asset held for sale, and you can find procedures as well. I hope all of you are reading right the asset held for sale. You have 5 minutes. Have you all read the asset held for sale 9 marks? And you know you have to do three things, right, for 9 marks. So let me illustrate you now how you go about writing in the answer. Now, this is again an illustrative answer before anyone asks me again this question. So I am doing it in bullets just for session, but please see my answer for it. So let me put that line up front because that's the frequently asked question so far in the session. Okay, now having put this, let me put a table for illustration. Right, my first column have the matters, and my first matter is asset held for sale. And the very first thing I have to do on asset held for sale is comment on the SAAE. Then I have to write procedures, and then I have to write deficiencies. Okay, so we were discussing this last column. The last column which says deficiencies in the internal control system. Obviously that belongs to the company. I have to find the deficiencies within the company. So I have to see the company and find the deficiencies from within the company. Comment on the sufficiency. Comment on the sufficiency is basically I have to look at the audit team. What audit team has done? Has the audit team done something good or bad? So I have to see the audit team for the first column. Have the audit team done something good, or the audit team have done something bad? Because I have to comment on the sufficiency of the evidence obtained by the audit team. So the first column belongs to the audit team when I'm reading the case. The last column belongs to the company. What are weaknesses within the company which I should communicate to them? And then I know my procedures, right? Procedures is something I have to perform on what? Procedures I have to perform on asset held for sale, right? And please remember that just like evidence CTRM, because this time we have to write the procedure. So the T will replace, right? It will become C, case. Instead of the T, it will become V, verb. Verb means action. Verb. Verb means recalculate. Verb means review. Verb means discuss. So you have to write a procedure this time, right? So you have to start with a verb, CV. Rest remains the same. Every procedure will have a reason, and you have to write 1 mark per procedure, marks. So instead of the CTRM, it has become CVRM. Is that clear to everyone? So comment on the sufficiency. I have to look at the audit team and whether the audit team have done something good or bad in the case. For deficiencies, I have to look at the company and see what are deficiencies within the company. And for procedures, I have to apply the mnemonic CVRM. Okay, then let's start on with the answer. If I just erase everything and start typing in the answer. Okay, the first column, comment on the sufficiency, deficiencies. Okay, I'm reading the case. Due to the planned disposal of one of the Thermon Company factory site, the property and associated assets have been classified as held for sale in the financial statement. A manual journal has been posted by the finance director. A manual journal has been posted by the finance director. How good is that? Is that a weakness in the company systems? Can a director post the journal entry? Can a director post a journal entry? Is that what the director is paid for? Rather, director is paid for taking decisions rather than posting the journal entries. So that's a big weakness in the system, right? That the director is posting the journal entries. Number one, finance director posting the journal entry is the first weakness which I should communicate to those charged with governance, that the director cannot post the journal entry because that is not the money you're paying director for. You're paying money to director to take decisions, to make budgets, forecast decisions. Finance director posting the manual journal entry is the first weakness. To reclassify the assets as current assets and to adjust the value of the assets for impairment and reversal of depreciation charge from the date at which the asset met the criteria to be held for sale. So the director have posted the journal entry. The finance director asked the senior to check the journal before it was posted on the basis there being no one with relevant knowledge to do so at the Thermon Company. The director is saying that there is no one with relevant knowledge to do this at Thermon Company. And no one can check the manual journal entry. There is no one with relevant knowledge to do this at Thermon Company. This is a weakness, right? That means within the finance department of the company, there is a lack of competence. There is a lack of competence in the finance department that no one can check the relevant journal entry. That is the reason the finance director is doing it. So that's the weakness number two. No one with relevant knowledge. no one with relevant knowledge in Thurman Company to check the journal entry, to check the journal entry. So see, we found two weaknesses in the last column, something which pertains with management. So we're getting 2 marks in the column number 3. Okay, then let's see what the audit team has done. Have they done something good or something bad? When you change the paragraph, it says the planned disposal was discussed with management. Discussed, I just told you in my lecture, was discussed with management. It was such an important event. It was such an important event, and we simply discussed it with the management. So the problem is discussion alone is not a sufficient appropriate audit evidence because it was such an important event. This was such an important event, right? This is an extraordinary event. For extraordinary events which takes place after several years, like an asset held for sale, you cannot just do a discussion with management. You should have checked the underlying conditions of asset held for sale. You should have verified whether the company have floated a tender in the newspaper to sell the asset, whether they have contacted any potential buyer, or whether any potential buyer have contacted the company to buy the assets held for sale. You didn't discuss the underlying conditions, or sorry, you didn't work on any underlying conditions, right? You just have a discussion with management. So I just told you discussion alone cannot be sufficient to properly tolerate evidence. And for something as important as asset held for sale. Second, a brief note has been put in the working paper. A brief note that for an extraordinary event? No, an extraordinary event happens once in 2 years, once in 3 years, or once in a year. So for an extraordinary event, how can you put a brief note? You should have a detailed note, and in a detailed note, you should have assured the conditions of IFRS 5. So you should have a detailed note, right? Rather than you should have a brief note. Right? So a brief note was put in the audit working paper, right? So my point of concern here is a brief note, a brief note, rather an exclamation mark, a brief note. How can that be possible? How can that be possible for an important event? You should have a detailed note for an important event, not a brief note. Then what you wrote in the note is very important. You wrote in the note that the management treatment is correct. See, a brief note has been put in the audit working paper stating that in the management opinion, the accounting treatment is correct. In a management opinion, the accounting treatment is correct. Should I write my opinion in my note, or should I write the management opinion in my note? A brief note is of the auditor, right? So should the auditor write his opinion or the management opinion on the accounting treatment, whether the auditor agrees or disagree with the accounting treatment? Right? You should put the auditor opinion, right? Rather than you're putting the management opinion, because the note belongs to you. So you should justify whether you agree with it or not. So that's another problem. So anything which relates to the auditor, good or bad, has to go in the first column. The note gives management opinion. The note gives management opinion. Rather should have given auditor opinion. Rather should have given auditor opinion. Right? So at least I found 3 comments so far. Discussion alone, brief note, and note gives management opinion rather than the auditor opinion. And then I go back and see the last line. It says, the manual journal has been arithmetically checked by a different member of the audit team. Okay, you have done the arithmetical check of by a different member of the audit team. A different member means obviously a junior. A junior must have done the arithmetical check, so that's fine. And the amount agreed back to the non-current asset register. Amount agreed back to the non-current asset register. Agreed back to the non-current asset register. Was it not reclassify? Was it not reclassify as a current asset? So have I done a blunder? Amounts agreed back to the non-current asset register rather than I should have agreed the amounts to the current assets because it has been reclassified as a current asset. So have I done the right agree back or have I done the wrong agree? Okay, so I did a wrong agree back, right? A wrong agree back to non-current asset register, which is not appropriate. Non-current asset register. The asset was classified as a current asset, right? So why am I doing the agree back to the non-current asset register? So a wrong agree back to non-current asset register is inappropriate. This was inappropriate, right? So see how many comments I've got. I got 4 comments on sufficiency and appropriateness of the audit evidence. Wherever I believed auditor did something wrong, wherever I believed auditor did something wrong, I wrote that in my first column. So as simple as that for your exam paper, comment on the sufficiency means wherever audit team has done something wrong, you will put it in the comment on SAAE. As simple as that. So wherever you find the audit team has done something wrong, you will put that under the comment on sufficiency and appropriateness of the audit evidence. So I found 4 mistakes of the audit team. I found 4 mistakes of the audit team, right? And I found 2 deficiencies. So how many procedures should I write now? I write 4 comments on sufficiencies and 2 deficiencies. So how many procedures should I write to make my marks up to 9? How many procedures should I write to make my marks up to 9? 3. 6. Zishan, why 6? I got 4 marks in the first column. For every comment, 1 mark. I got 2 marks in the deficiency column. Every deficiency is 1 mark. So 4 and 2 is 6. So how many procedures will I be writing? 3. 3 procedures, right? So procedures will come as a balancing figure, as a balancing figure, and the balancing figure this time is 3. Now, when the management has classified an asset held for sale, what should I do? I should review correspondence from any potential buyer. I should review any correspondence from a potential buyer to confirm that the asset will be sold within a year, right? I hope all of you know the conditions of IFRS 5, that an asset can be classified as held for sale only if it can be sold within a year. So I should review the correspondence from any potential buyer to confirm that the asset will be sold within a year, because that will confirm that the buyer is willing to buy it. Yes, I can review the board minutes even. I can review the board minutes to confirm the rationale, why the assets were held for sale. What was the rationale? What was the justification why you held these assets for sale? I can review any tender document. I can review any tender document floated to sell the assets. Review any tender document floated to sell the assets. That will confirm that the management is willing to sell it within a 12-month period. Review any marketing. Review any marketing campaign done to sell the asset. So the very important condition is it should be sold within 12 months. So my point number 1 emphasize on 12 months. My point 3 emphasize on 12 months. My point 4 emphasize on 12 months. Review any marketing campaign. Is the company actively marketing the assets? Is the company actively marketing the asset so that it can be sold, someone can buy it? Yes, Muhammad Afzal, but that would be a evidence, right? Copy of the asset register. You can say review the asset register rather than review a copy of asset register. You are mixing the evidence and procedures together, Muhammad Afzal. Review asset register is a procedure. Copy of asset register is an evidence. And you are saying review copy of asset register. So you're just mixing both of them. I hope you're clear on that, right? Please don't do such blunders in the exam hall. It's fine for the class, but it's not fine for the exam hall. So see how I made the structure for the type 2 question. Let's do another exercise, right, on the second one. Okay, the second one is a capital expenditure. Now, how many marks we have for capital expenditure? 7. Okay, if I look at the capital expenditure, when auditing the company's capital expenditure, the audit team selected a material transaction. The audit team selected a material transaction. The audit team selected The audit team selected a material transaction. A material transaction. Is that sufficient? A material transaction? That means I've selected a single transaction. That means I've selected one sample. The audit team selected a material transaction. So is that sufficient? It is incorrect sample size, right? Zishan, just wait for 2 minutes. So the audit team selected a material transaction. So A is less, right? So what should I write in my first column? One sample is not sufficient. One sample is not sufficient to test capital expenditure. One sample is not sufficient to test capital expenditure. Right? So the first problem is one sample. So the question started this time with the auditor. In the last case, asset held for sale, the question started with management. So one sample. Then if I go back, it says to test and found that the key controls over capital expenditures were not operating effectively. So the controls were not operating effectively. Authorization had not been obtained and appropriate segregation of duties were not maintained. So there are two control weaknesses. One, no authorization. Second, no segregation of duties. So authorization has not been obtained and appropriate segregation were not maintained. So there are two weaknesses, right, which I should put in the second last column. The weakness number one, no authorization is the first weakness. And the second, lack of segregation of duties. So I found two weaknesses, right? And I found one problem with the auditor. So far out of the 7 marks, I'm taking my 3 marks. So what goes in the column 3? Anything which pertains with the internal control system of the company. What goes in the column 1? Where the audit team has done something wrong. So I've written that on above, right? So column 3 pertains to weaknesses in internal control system. Right? Okay, let's go back. The audit team noted the details of the internal control deficiencies, noted the details, but they didn't inform the management. The audit team noted the details of the deficiency, noted the details. Should we only note the details or should we also discuss that with management as well? So we just noted, but we didn't brought that to the knowledge of the management. So another wrong thing on part of the audit team. What wrong thing they did? They just noted the weakness. They just noted the weakness, but didn't inform the management of the weakness. So that is another mistake on part of the auditor, right? They just noted the weakness, but didn't inform the management of the weakness. So wherever audit team has done something wrong, you will put it under comment on sufficiency and appropriateness of the audit evidence. I hope that can make your life easier. Wherever audit team has done something wrong, you will put it in the comment on sufficiency and appropriateness of the audit evidence. So they just noted, right? The next point. The audit team noted the details of the internal control deficiencies and updated the systems on the permanent file to reflect the deficiency. Updated the systems on the permanent file to reflect the deficiency. Is deficiency of a permanent nature or is deficiency of a current nature? I hope you know the difference between a permanent file and a current file. Anything which pertains to the year goes in the current file, and anything which pertains for a longer run goes to the permanent file. In the permanent file, you can have the memorandums, the articles, the agreements, the policies. But how can you put the deficiency in a permanent file? Because the deficiency will be rectified. So how can it be of a permanent nature? Yes, so should is that another mistake of the auditor? The deficiency was put in the permanent file, whereas it should had been put in current file. So three comments on the sufficiency so far. The deficiency was put in the permanent file, whereas it should have been put in the current file. So 3 and 2, 5 marks out of the 7. 1 mark per valid point. The audit work completed on this order. This order means the one sample you took, right? The audit work completed on this order was to agree the purchase invoice of the vehicle to purchase invoices and to the cash book and the bank statement. So what we checked for vehicle, we only checked the purchase invoice of the vehicle, and we only confirmed the cash book and the bank statement. So if you verify the purchase invoice of the vehicle, that can give you the rights ownership of the vehicle. But have we checked the physical existence of the vehicle? Have we checked the physical existence of the vehicle? Is existence a very important assertion of an asset? Is existence a very important assertion of an asset? So have we checked the existence? Yes, so there are lackings, right? We didn't check the physical existence. So even that is something I've not done, right? So I can write them in my procedures here. Can I write my procedure like this? Review physically inspect a sample of vehicles. Physically inspect a sample of vehicles. Physically inspect a sample of vehicles. Physically inspect a sample of vehicles to the premises to confirm they exist. Because I didn't confirm the physical existence, I can also write that under my criticism, that the audit team didn't didn't verify the physical existence. The audit team didn't verify the physical existence. So I can criticize the audit team for that the audit team didn't verify the physical existence. So the audit team didn't verify the physical existence. And I can write my procedure. And my second procedure could be recalculate the depreciation. Recalculate the depreciation charge on vehicles. So the audit team didn't verify the physical existence, right? They just worked on the ownership. So I got 4 under my first column. I got 2 under my last column, 6. I can only write one procedure to make my 7. So I can physically inspect them and I can recalculate the depreciation. So when you get a mixture question, in P7, first make a sketch and see what you have to do. Now, knowing you have to do three things and everything carries 1 mark, everything carries 1 mark. So you can balance yourself because there is no cap. So you can write more in one column, less in second column. And again, columns are being used for rough working. You cannot make columns in the actual exams, right? That clarification is important. I'm just making columns for the sake of the session to save my time. But you have to do answer in a paragraph form. Are you getting a sense of this question? You will do the payroll expense yourself, the 9 marks payroll expense, and you will see my answer for payroll expense, how I have written the answer on payroll expense. I've written a complete answer for this question. So please ensure that you're preparing this question, as a question like such sounds very important for the June 2018 examination. Is that clear to everyone? Is everyone clear exactly what is to be done on comment on the sufficiency? So when the examiner says comment on the sufficiency and appropriateness of the evidence, you will see from the case, where the audit team has done something wrong. And wherever you think the audit team has done something wrong, you will put that under the comment on the sufficiency and appropriateness of the evidence. Then the deficiencies is very simple. You can easily find the deficiency because that will be given very openly in the case study. And then the last thing is the balancing. How many procedures to write? So procedures will come as a balancing figure. And please remember that the procedure starts with a verb. So when you're writing a procedure, you're starting to write a procedure with a verb. Right? Is that clear with the type 2 question and the type of things the examiner was asking in one question? Is the 3 columns clear to everyone? Any confusions, any discussions, any questions, any concerns? Okay, so I hope you can better handle a question on evidence in a P7 exams. Please prepare yourself for the type 1 question as well as the type 2 question. Type 2 is more important, but you cannot compromise the type 1. Be prepared on both. I have shared resources with you, right, which contains questions for type 1 and 2, and I've shared my answers on type 1 and 2 of some of the questions which I do in my regular classes at the Bani School of Accountancy. So please ensure that you revise both the questions. And Danish, deficiency only relates with something on part of the management. Anything on part of the auditor has to go in sufficiency and appropriateness of audit evidence. Anything on part of the management will go in deficiency, right? Deficiency is in the system of the company, is in the system put in place by the management. So anything which happens with the auditor, whatever that is, has to go under the comment on the sufficiency and appropriateness of the audit evidence. So auditor is the SAAE, management is the deficiency in this question. I hope you're clear, Danish. So anything which belongs to management is a deficiency, anything which belongs to the auditor is a sufficiency and appropriateness of the audit evidence, whatever that is, right? So I hope you had a good and productive session today, and I hope a lot of myths and a lot of question marks and a lot of weaknesses you must be having must had been mitigated from the session today. So I hope the session will go a long way in helping you improving your answer qualities and getting you pass in the June 2018 exams. Yes, Zishan, I'll be sending the links of the lecture. Don't worry about that. That is my a firm promise that whenever whenever I end my lecture, whenever I end my lecture, I'll be sharing my lecture with you on the group. So don't worry about that at all, right? All my resources is for the students, right? Um I have no benefit of keeping resources with me because I have passed my P7 paper. I now need to make you pass P7 paper. So the resources I have is of no use to me, right? They're all for you. So don't be worried about sharing of resources at all. Okay, so I hope you had a wonderful session today. Please implement what you have learned today in the session, type 1 and type 2. We are meeting tomorrow for day 3, where the agenda is ethical and professional issues. And in the recent past, that has been a very dominating topic. So I'll try picking up the recent questions on ethical and professional issues from 2016 exams and 2017 exams in the session tomorrow to illustrate you what are ethical issues and what are professional issues and what are quality control issues. So we have a very challenging task tomorrow for the day 3, but I'll try to make that clear as well. That so by the end of the day 3 tomorrow, you're very clear on ethical, professional, and quality control. Okay, that is it for the session today. If you have any further questions, you can put them on the WhatsApp group and I'll be responding to them in as less time as possible. Okay, that was very good having interaction with you and good having you on board for this crash course. Goodbye and Allah Hafiz.